Ms Franks.
Thank you, Mr President. I move that Order of the Day Private Business number 13, obviously standing in my name, be moved. That is, that in the opinion of this Council, a joint committee be appointed to inquire into and report on the potential impact of legalisation of cannabis in South Australia for adult use with reference to legal frameworks and approaches in other jurisdictions, including implications for justice, for health and for the economy and any other related matter. I rise today not for the first time to talk about the legalisation of cannabis, but indeed to move a motion to establish a joint committee of this parliament to inquire into that matter. Members will be aware that I have introduced a bill for the legalisation of cannabis twice now in this place, but I also recognise that this is a significant and complex conversation that needs to be had by our parliament, and a new conversation to many within this place. But this is one that is not entirely rare. This is one of those not entirely rare moments when the community has been well ahead of us as legislators for quite a period of time. It is time for us here as legislators to step up and look at the legislation around adult use of cannabis in our state, and we're starting to get there, Mr President. I'd like to note that the Crime and Public Integrity Committee has previously made recommendations to investigate or at least to consider the legalisation of cannabis in this state. Recreational cannabis, as it is often called, has been decriminalised in our state of South Australia since 1987. This hasn't led to any great problems in our state. In fact, the opposite is believed by our current Police Commissioner, Grant Stevens, who stated on ABC 891 ABC Radio Adelaide in this past week, when asked about the matter, he stated, "So I think last year we gave out around 3,700 expiation notices for cannabis offences. Of a population of 1.8 million, that's not a lot. I would suggest that the vast majority of those were issued in public places or private places where we've attended for a noisy party or something like that. So I don't think it's a big issue for South Australia," stated our current Police Commissioner on ABC Radio. He continued, "We have a framework that allows police to take action when we come across people who are in possession of cannabis or who are smoking cannabis in a public place, but that doesn't affect very many people." Further, of course, as we should all know, medicinal cannabis was legalised by our Commonwealth Parliament in 2016, and medicinal cannabis products are now available in South Australia, though they continue to be difficult to access and expensive, even if you are able to obtain them. Many patients struggle to access or afford the medicine that they require in this state, and so they are turning to the black market or the green market. I note that in the other place earlier today, the motion of the member for Mount Gambier, the very committed Troy Bell, who's long been passionate about the issue of access to medicinal cannabis for his constituents, a motion there in the other place was passed in support of enhancing that access to medicinal cannabis that so many of our constituents seek, and so many of our constituents are criminalised simply because they are sick and seek something that technically we have legalised but effectively remains largely inaccessible. But around the world, we are also increasingly moving towards models that treat cannabis use as a health issue rather than a criminal issue. The war on drugs and the war on cannabis has unequivocally failed. And in the case of the war on cannabis, this has turned largely into a war on sick people. We need a better approach. 1 in 3 Australians have used cannabis in their lifetime, and we are seeing an ongoing rise in support in the population for the legalisation of cannabis, even from people who have never used cannabis in their lives. The latest National Drug Strategy Household Survey has shown that regular cannabis use has become more accepted than smoking tobacco, with 20% of respondents in support of regular cannabis use compared to 15% support for regular tobacco use. That being said, it is worth noting that 78% of people surveyed indicated that they will still not use cannabis even if it were to be legalised, which I hope will go a long way to assuring people who are on the fence about reforms that if we do legalise cannabis, we are highly unlikely to see a mass take-up of cannabis use. Indeed, what we will do is stop the criminalisation of those who use it. Zero-tolerance approaches to cannabis have unequivocally failed to reduce both supply and demand for cannabis. They have instead fuelled a multi-billion-dollar global black market, which has supercharged crime and corruption. Further, this has led to the proliferation of more dangerous and profitable synthetic drugs. A legal, regulated cannabis market would ensure that users have access to unadulterated and unregulated cannabis products, and consumers could be informed of the strength and characteristics of the cannabis product that they are using, along with any potential impacts on both their physical or mental health. We must acknowledge that not only is that war on drugs not working, it is damaging lives. We haven't reduced drug use. In fact, Australia remains one of the highest per capita consumers of cannabis in the world, despite our laws. But dragging people through a criminal justice system needlessly is not something we should continue. What's worse is that our current laws target some of the most vulnerable communities in the country, including young people, First Nations people and people on lower incomes in regional and outer metropolitan areas, more than they do other cohorts. It bears mentioning as well that First Nations people are disproportionately more likely to be charged with cannabis-related crimes than non-Indigenous Australians, who are offered warnings nearly half the time rather than charged. This unequal policing and enforcement of our cannabis laws can help reinforce the cycle of poverty, where even a minor cannabis charge can then lock people out of certain jobs and opportunities in the future. The aggressive policing of cannabis across our nation, including through drug dogs and roadside drug testing, is part of why drug use in Australia is increasingly moving towards drugs such as methamphetamine and other drugs that are less easily policed and less detectable than cannabis. Also detectable, as in terms of the drug roadside testing, is absolutely immoral when you consider that even the very ads that are put out by the authorities themselves acknowledge that the effects of the drug may well not be being experienced by the person who is found to have cannabis in their system, and that they are not impaired. And so it does make you wonder what indeed is the point of that particular approach. There are existing models internationally that show us how the legalisation of cannabis could work, and it's time this South Australian Parliament investigated them. I would also like to commend the work of my federal Greens colleagues, and particularly Senator David Shoebridge, who's most recently working towards the legalisation of cannabis nationally and has introduced a bill into the federal Parliament. In recent months, Germany has committed to legalising cannabis, joining Canada, Uruguay, South Africa, Jamaica, Mexico, Malta, and at least 19 states in the United States of America where recreational cannabis use is now legal. I would like to take this moment to outline just a few of the approaches that we see internationally to provide some insight into the sorts of things that this committee should consider and what the reality of cannabis legalisation actually looks like around the world. In the Netherlands, cannabis has been available for recreational use since 1976, with the consumption and sale of cannabis tolerated in licensed coffee shops. It's technically illegal, but not punishable, and the possession of up to 5 grams is decriminalised. Further, the cultivation of up to 5 plants is tolerated and not often enforced for non-commercial use, unless it's a professional grow setup. In Uruguay, which was the first nation state to establish a legally regulated cannabis market, adults can buy up to 40 grams every month from approved pharmacies. Users must register with authorities and have their purchases tracked. Registered users can set up smoking clubs of anywhere from 15 to 45 people to grow cannabis, and they can cultivate up to 99 plants in the same space. That being said, we do need to recognise the issues that Uruguay has experienced as well, with only 25 pharmacies licensed to sell cannabis. So 70% of consumers still purchase cannabis through the black market in that jurisdiction. I want to raise this example to illustrate the importance of when we are considering establishing a legal market for cannabis in our nation, getting it right and ensuring that it is actually more accessible and affordable than any black market. As we have already learned from the experience with medicinal cannabis, if a legal industry cannot compete in terms of price and products with the black market, then people will continue to source cannabis products from that market. If we get it right, we can remove the demand for a black market to exist. Canada was the second nation to establish a legally regulated cannabis market, and there is much to learn from Canada. There, adults can buy from government, private or online retailers. In some jurisdictions, use is permitted in private residences and in public spaces where tobacco is permitted. In some jurisdictions, users can also grow plants at home. In Spain, shared consumption is allowed through cannabis social clubs, which are not-for-profit associations democratically operated by their members. Members of the club can collectively grow and distribute cannabis amongst other club members. In the US, as I mentioned, Mr Acting President, we've seen some 19 states and a few other jurisdictions legalise small amounts of cannabis for adult recreational use. I think in this discussion in particular, I would like to highlight New York's, quote, seedling opportunity initiative, end quote. This requires the first 100 cannabis dispensary licences to go to those people who have previous cannabis convictions. This initiative is in recognition of the impact of that United States war on drugs, the impact that it's had on people within the community of New York, and it is the first step of creating a new socially equitable cannabis industry, as well as restoring the harm that the war on drugs has wreaked on those communities. It is important for us to consider as well, when we think about legalising cannabis in South Australia, that we must allow for past convictions to be spent. But we should also consider how we provide new opportunities for people with past cannabis convictions. Germany is another contemporary example for us to watch closely, where they are likely to become the world's largest market for legal cannabis in the near future. Further, their legalisation of cannabis is likely to lead to a domino effect throughout other European countries, particularly France, which has a much bigger problem with illegal cannabis use and is watching Germany's deliberations quite closely. The German government has committed to and remains on track to pass laws within the current parliamentary term to allow for the legal distribution of cannabis, although at the moment the process is having to contend with European regulations, including the UN 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs and a Council of the European Union Framework Decision from 2004 that does require member states to ensure the sale of drugs, including cannabis, are, quote, punishable by effective, proportionate and dissuasive criminal penalties, end quote. But looking closer to home, on the 9th of June, Thailand became the first country in Asia and only the third country in the world after Canada and Uruguay to legalise cannabis nationwide. It's a stunning move for a country that used to be famous for some of the world's harshest drug laws. Some 4,200 people who were in prison for cannabis-related offences became eligible for release on the very same day that cannabis was legalised, and those convicted of illegal cultivation even had their seized equipment returned to them. They went from being behind bars to being back in legal business within hours. On June 17, Thailand absorbed cannabis into an existing law governing traditional medicine, meaning its sale was banned to under 20s, pregnant women and breastfeeding mothers. Growing cannabis plants for personal consumption is allowed, but selling plants or derivative products officially requires a licence. Whereas cannabis flowers can have unlimited quantities of THC, derivatives like gummies can only have a token 0.2%. Smoking cannabis at home may be legal, but lighting up in the street is discouraged by existing laws governing behaviour deemed, quote, a public nuisance. This could mean a $700 fine or 3 months imprisonment. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and the legalisation of cannabis in Thailand happened essentially by default after its interministerial body that oversees drug policy couldn't decide on specific limits that should be placed on cannabis. This has led to much confusion in that jurisdiction, with processes and requirements still being ironed out. The committee could look with great interest to see, in some ways, what to do as well as what not to do in that particular jurisdiction. I think these international examples show that we do need an inquiry to properly consider the range of options before us and to figure out what would work best for our state, as was articulated quite well by our very own Police Commissioner, Grant Stevens, when he was asked about the Greens' federal proposal to legalise cannabis, to which he said, "That's something we'll have to take a close look at. I don't know the answers to these, but if you legalise an illicit substance, does that completely remove the black market, or does it provide another avenue for the black market because of the cost of the legal substances and the rules and regulations around it?" So I'm guessing that legalised cannabis won't be available to anyone under the age of 18. So you're still going to have some element of an illicit market that needs to be attended to. There'll be opportunities for criminals to still make money, I would suspect, but it's not something we've had a very close look at this point in time. End quote. And that is the point. It is time for this parliament to take a closer look at the legalisation of cannabis across the range of jurisdictions, as I've outlined, so that when we do it here, we do it right. He elaborated further in response to a question about police checking if people have purchased cannabis legally. He responded, "That's right. Will you be permitted to grow your own cannabis? There's a lot of questions that come out of legalising cannabis and the regulatory framework that goes around it, because I don't think anyone expects it will be a free-for-all. But yeah, it's a complex debate, and it'll be complex legislation that we'll have to get our heads round if it ever comes our way." Well, that's our job as a parliament, to ensure that whoever is Police Commissioner has laws that will work for all. There is much for this committee to consider, but in particular I would suggest that it would look into the potential impacts with reference to our legal frameworks, the implications for justice and health systems and for the economy, appropriate legal sanctions for unlawful sale or distribution, including to minors, additional taxation measures and where that revenue should be allocated, such as education and health, prohibitions on tobacco and alcohol industries from entering the cannabis industry, and the role of grower cooperatives, just to name a few. The economic argument is one that many believe is important for us to consider as well, and I couldn't agree more. The Parliamentary Budget Office in Canberra has previously estimated that national legalisation could raise upwards of $3.5 billion in tax revenue over 4 years. If South Australia were to achieve even 1/10 of that revenue from the legalisation of cannabis, that's an additional $350 million over 4 years in our state budget. Imagine the good that we could do with that money, not to mention the reduction in costs of no longer policing and prosecuting the recreational use of cannabis. There are many benefits that would stem from the legalisation of cannabis in our state, and much to consider. I firmly believe that a joint committee inquiry would best allow us to consider all the evidence and options before us and come out with a strong model that is fair to all. It would be able to look beyond the remit of CPIP in terms of looking beyond just the justice implications, which are incredibly important, but also allow us to look at all of those broader issues at all. The idea of having a committee of inquiry that is joint of both houses is not just something for many a pun, but indeed something that shows the importance of this issue to this state. The citizens who are currently criminalised simply for being sick cannot continue in its current form, and that motion passing in the other place certainly gives me heart that many people in this parliament are now looking to this issue as something worthy of proper deliberation and consideration, and with an importance placed upon it by having that joint parliamentary cross-party approach established. And with that, Mr President, I commend the motion.